What's up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast. We got a ton to get to with the Patriots. None of it real good. We have Phil Perry alongside in just a moment. Now, one of the things I want to dive into is the messaging and the drama around the team this week. But also, let's talk football and the development of the asset. The asset, of course, is Drake Maye. Maximizing him is job one in 2024. So how's the support group around him? Brian Hoyer had some interesting thoughts on the game plan with Tom Giles.
When I watch some of these young guys, there's one play in particular where it's almost a pick six. Booty and Polk are on the ground. Drake's ready to throw the ball, and they're slipping and sliding and falling on the ground, and he's got to adjust, throws the ball behind KJ Osborne. And so I think, yeah, we see it here. There's Polk on the ground, which was his first read. He's trying to throw a stop route to him. And then here's Booty on the ground, and KJ Osborne, we always said you never want to drift on lateral routes. He starts to drift. This was another play that Drake didn't have great footwork. He's throwing off his back foot, and he's lucky this wasn't a pick six right here. So
should have been a pick six.
Yeah, these young guys need to take some lessons from these older guys. Hunter Henry, Jonathan Jones, the guys who've been there before and have had success, and realize, like, if you're going to go say stuff to the media, you better at least perform out on the field and back it up.
What's your impression of the wide receivers right now, especially the young ones, in the way that...
I mean, if I was out there, I'd be throwing to Kendrick Bourne, Hunter Henry, guys that I know that are going to be reliable enough to do what they're supposed to do. Now, Drake's in a bad predicament because you can't just throw to two guys the entire game. He wants to throw these guys. And I will say this about Booty. He runs a great deep ball. So I think that is something that you put in. And when you put in a pass play, you don't just say, okay, there's going to be one go over here. There's concepts. So what I would do is I'd put him on the outside and give him a go ball. And if Drake sees he's one-on-one, throw him the ball. But you can't just go out there and say, hey, just throw me the ball. I'm the only guy out here. I think there's other people that they need to get involved. They need to get Kendrick Bourne involved because he's a big piece of this offense. And you hear him talk about the things that have been said, and he's being a good leader and saying the right things.
So the route running not good enough right now from the young guys?
I mean, there are good ones, but I think there's a lack of discipline and there's a lack of detail. And for so long, Patriots fans used to watch. I mean, Tom Brady you wouldn't play. And Drake's not there yet to be able to say that. But those were the things people ask, Taylor Price, the guys that didn't play. Well, Tom would see him do something like that, and he goes, well, I'm not throwing the ball. If you put him out there, we only got 10. So you're not going to have that with a young rookie quarterback. But those guys, if they want to have the ball more, you got to be more consistent in the detail.
In a lot of ways, Drake Maye is, in his third start this weekend, going to be herding cats yet again. You have rookies like Jalen Polk, who's in the concussion protocol, may or may not play, but Kayshon Boutte, Javon Baker, who hasn't been able to get on the field, Tyquan Thornton, who when he was on the field wasn't performing, KJ Osborne in his first year in the program, and I'm forgetting others. But the bottom line is these guys are individually demanding. And this is something that, well, listen to Kayshon Boutte. You want to hear demanding?
Everybody want the ball, but it's like, I'll say for me personally in the game, I get frustrated when I'm not getting thrown the ball, knowing that I didn't caught every ball that was thrown to me this season. So I just feel like I would always go to the sideline and demand the ball. So whether it was that deep ball, I asked for that. The Texans game, I asked for that. So it's like, I feel like I shouldn't have to really ask, So it's kind of...
So this can't be easy on Drake Maye. And I asked him about that before we even spoke to Boutte on Wednesday of this week. And here's what Drake Maye had to say when I asked him about his interaction with his wideouts in making sure they're in the right place and whether he feels emboldened to say, you got to do it different.
Yeah, I think I'm getting there, especially, preaching what MVP preaches and, doing the little things and, some of the love of the, for the love of the game routes of spacing and maybe you have a clear route to get somebody else open. I think we're kind of feeling that out. Got a young team, especially in the receiver room that, the tight ends got a better understanding of, they've been in a lot of different concepts and offenses. So I think the kind of young guys are starting to figure it out, and I think here you're going to see it click, and I think we have some talent on offense. I'm looking forward to seeing when that happens.
All right, that's Drake Maye. Brought to you by Shaw's, perfecting the art of fresh. Phil Perry along, he's perfected the art of fresh too. When we talk about Drake Maye, and you've noted a number of times, the spacing, maybe the attention to detail with the route running, we've heard national former quarterbacks talk about that. This is something that Drake Maye is dealing with, and it's not an ideal situation when we hear Hoyer highlighting it, and then players like Boutte unabashedly saying, yeah, you got to get me the ball.
Boy, between players asking for more targets, players not always running the right routes, not always giving maybe the best effort on those routes, and the spacing, whether that's scheme or the players themselves not really understanding what to do, it's made what we already knew was a bad situation, Tom, particularly because of the offensive line. And when it came to pass protection, that really wasn't the issue in London. But you take that, you add all the receiver stuff you're talking about to it, it's made a bad situation even worse, and yet he's still playing well.
And that's what's crazy is job one is developing Drake Maye. And we are now fixated on the travails of the defense. We've been fixated on the travails of the offensive line. And Drake Maye has come in and he's performed well. But when we talk about lasting impacts and issues caused to the most important position on the field and that priority situation with Drake Maye, the wide receiver room, the architecture of the offense, and how well and how easily it moves along like clockwork or like an hourglass matters. They don't have all the next decade to develop Maye. That's why it's important to get these things on point.
Well, and you would like to think, Tom, by the end of this year, they can look at it and say, okay, we know we still need a true number one, but we have 3 more players at that position that we believe are starting caliber NFL receivers. And I'm not sure they can say that about this group right now. They have Pop Douglas.
Okay.
He's a starter. I think he's a true slot. It's really only one place you can play him. He's your 3. Kayshon Boutte, is he there yet? Is he in the definite starter in the NFL category?
Feels like a 4.
I'm with you. I think he's shown flashes, but if he's not being consistent in some of the areas that they need to see him be more consistent, I don't know how you put him there. And Jalen Polk, to me, is still TBD as well, even though I thought coming in that he would be starting caliber and ready to go. And it looked that way in training camp.
Yep.
And so now he's taken a turn. If you somehow leave this year with fewer receiving options than you came into it with, that to me is a disaster.
And what's interesting is this is a shared situation on both regimes. When we ask, well, why is it like that? And we look at this offseason, for instance, they went out and got KJ Osborne, a fine, middle of the road, average free agent. That was a pretty good get for an okay team that just needed a third receiver. Here, he hasn't really found his stride. Now, why is the room bad to begin with? Well, Jacoby Myers was ushered out the door, replaced with Juju Smith-Schuster, who didn't last too long. Devontae Parker couldn't really play either, and he's out of the NFL. Nelson Aguilar didn't work. It was only a 2-year contract. He would have been gone pretty soon anyway. But the entire mechanism of the passing offense has been broken for so long and revamped for so long. Even when Josh McDaniels was here, the personnel was such trash at different junctures that they've never been able to get any traction. So now Tyler Hughes is the wide receivers coach with Tyquan Underwood underneath him. Troy Brown is a specialty coach, was the wide receivers coach previously. Alex Van Pelt is the offensive coordinator, as we know. There's a bunch of quarterback coaches. There's Ben McAdoo as a consultant. Who does it fall to make sure guys are in the right place at the right time, at the right depth, and off of friggin' social media?
Well, the social media thing to me would be on the head coach. If you want to make that a rule, and I don't think he does, I think he wants these guys to have the freedom to speak their minds and be themselves, and part of that is using social media. But that's on him. If he wants to limit that, flip the switch. Tell him in a meeting, sorry, guys, it's over. You had your leeway, and now things have gone sideways, and people aren't using it the way that I feel like they should be using it in season. So this is a new rule. Now, how does that play with your players? I don't know. Does that come off as disingenuous?
Aside from that, offensively, I shouldn't have brought up the social media.
Tyler Hughes, you're the receivers coach. Set the standard. Let these guys know what's acceptable and what's not. And playing time should be adjusted accordingly. And he should be the one that's able to make his case to Alex Van Pelt. This is why player X is our best X. Player Y is our best Z, et cetera, on down the line. There's one name that we didn't mention that I should have mentioned in terms of projecting out at this receiver group, and it's Kendrick Bourne. I think he's a starting caliber receiver, and I think he's tried to be a leader in that room. And I give him credit for that. To me, he's a positive influence. I don't know about KJ Osborne. He seems like a professional. He seems like a nice human being. He's clearly frustrated with the situation right now, and I wonder what they do with him moving forward, Tom, because for a player who is of KJ Osborne's ilk, are you willing to put up with I'm not sure I really want to be here. I'll be wherever my feet are. If they trade me, well, do you just get rid of that player because it's not worth it?
Did he intimate to that when you were at his locker on Wednesday?
So what he said today was, when asked if he wanted to be traded, this is where I am. This is the place that I signed to be. A lot of things are out of my control, but I like to be where my feet are at. Today, I'm here. We'll just kind of rock with it as it goes. He was asked later if he wanted to be in Foxborough, which is a little bit different than the question of do you want to be traded? And he said, of course. So some mixed messaging there. And I do think he's trying to be a good teammate to some of the younger players on the roster, but I just wonder if you have to make some kind of move. Is it time for drastic measures for Jerod Mayo and for this front office? And do you look at the receiver group and say, boy, nothing in there is working right now. It feels like guys aren't really getting it. This guy's not really playing for us. Seems like he doesn't want to be here. Let's say goodbye.
And that's what's really interesting about this is to what end and to what level of improvement. Because if you say to KJ Osborne, a seemingly professional guy who's seen a few things and played in this style of offense, and you move on from him, then you're saying to Kayshon Boutte, okay, you're our guy. And I think that Kayshon Boutte has plenty of talent, and I think that Kayshon Boutte does catch everything thrown his way, as he pointed out. But I think that there's a level of candor that Kayshon Boutte is starting to engage in that's a little mind-numbing. And maybe it's just because I have Belichick, syndrome, that when I hear somebody speak so candidly and so, for lack of a better word, selfishly, I just recoil and say that does not sound like something you want to foist upon a team that is a group of 53 with interdependent cogs. So if you move on from a KJ Osborne, you promote all these guys. Jalen Polk with his, been in the league for 11 minutes, and he's already got a completely different definition of how well he plays football compared to how he's done it. But if you do all those things, you're continuing to perhaps empower players who may or may not be ideally suited to helping Drake Maye reach his potential. And that, bottom line, is the most important friggin' thing for this team, is to find pathways to make Drake Maye as good as he can be.
It's really difficult at that position to me because oftentimes the most talented guys, which you need to develop your young quarterback, is talent at that receiver position. The most talented guys are going to be guys like Kayshon Boutte, who say the things he says, which is, I want the football. I need the football. I catch the football every time you throw me the football, so let's do that again, okay? What do you think? That's just the way of life in the NFL at that position, and you're right. We haven't seen it here because Bill Belichick didn't really operate that way, and he didn't tolerate it, but it does happen other places, and it's just a question to me of how hard are you willing to swallow and accept some of the stuff that you're going to hear at the podium, whether it's Javon Baker, Kayshon Boutte, KJ Osborne, who doesn't fit into that category in terms of the talent, but you get my drift. How much of that are you willing to take in order to make sure that your quarterback has a few guys who can win in one-on-one coverage?
You know who didn't do that stuff? Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers, great soldier, brought up in the culture, would have been excellent to have right now for a player like Drake Maye. And all the pursuit made for Calvin Ridley, we've already seen him earlier this season. Patriots dangled $22 million or whatever it was at him, and he spent the day in the locker room after a Tennessee Titans loss, which is where he wound up going, saying, they got to get me the ball in the first half once in a while. Sorry. Bleep that. Look, my last little note here, understand something. After 3 seasons, the Patriots don't have to make a decision on Drake Maye, but they'd like to have a concrete and reasonable idea as to whether or not they're going to pick up his fifth-year option. That's 51 games. The Patriots have played 7 of those 51. In 44 games, they want to have an idea. I'm not saying Drake Maye is about to go anywhere, but there's a finite amount of time to develop the guy. And that's why, again, philosophically, part of me was like, get the other stuff straight first. Well, but I don't even know if they would. Now I'm sitting here thinking, Phil, maybe Drake Maye and the cut of his jib is better than a tackle and a wide receiver or a J.J. McCarthy might have been. Because I do really think that Drake Maye is well-suited, which I've said 38 times in the last week.
Right, and I give you credit for that because you had strongly held opinions on how they should handle the draft, but I think you're right. And I'm not going to tell you that I knew how he would handle an adverse situation, but to the story you wrote, while he was still a collegian and being, thinking about being drafted in the first round, he was tough, and he had what looked like the right makeup to go along with the physical traits that you need to be a quote-unquote tough or quote-unquote dependable player at that position. Jaden Daniels looks like going to miss this week. I'm not saying he's not tough, but he's not built in the same way that Drake Maye's built. So he can get a body of a defensive end landed on him, hit his left shoulder on the Gillette Stadium turf with a ton of force, sort of wriggle around on the ground for a good 30 seconds, but still pop up and be healthy and come back the next week and have a pretty good game.
It's pretty amazing. I forgot about that.
So I think you're right. He's the right guy, but I would go beyond even you need to develop him over 3 years. He's going to develop.
Yep.
I think he's already good.
Yes.
What I would say is you need to maximize your chances of being a good team with him on a cheap contract. So it's even more than just his personal development. It's your maximizing your own potential as a group with this particular player on his salary as it stands right now. You need to do a ton to surround him with whatever you can, expensive or not, to make sure you're getting the most out of this team.
And many of our listeners right now are saying, well, that's an issue the Patriots have that they're going to have to deal with because the Crafts don't spend money. And my counter to that is simply, who would you have liked them to bring in offensively this offseason to make him better? And I know the answers are Tyron Smith and Jonah Williams at the left tackle position, and they could have gone ahead with Calvin Ridley. But to me, I think that was throwing good money after bad in those situations, and you load up for later. When does later come, though, as I've talked about, some of these positions don't hit free agency. It's hard to have that money burning a hole in your pocket, and that's part of the reason. Well, why did they re-sign all Belichick's guys? Because they needed to do something with the friggin' money.
You have to field the team.
Yeah, you got to spend some of the money, too.
I do look at Calvin Ridley, and I do occasionally wonder how he would look in this Patriots. When Kayshon Boutte is winning down the field in one-on-one situations, as talented as Kayshon Boutte may be, and he showed he was in 2021 at LSU.
He ain't no burner.
If that was Calvin Ridley out there, and he's a guy who does understand how to run routes and what depths to be at and how spacing works. He's proven over the course of his career to be a pretty good route runner. Boy, what would he look? I know he's doing nothing in Tennessee. I think that has a lot to do with the quarterback play in Tennessee. If he's put with a much better player, in my opinion, in Drake Maye, does that suddenly look like it would have been money well spent?
Yeah, Will Levis is a disaster. Meanwhile, the story of the week has been Jerod Mayo, unfortunately, and his moments after the game. You never want to have the first 7 to 15 seconds of your post-game press conference dominate the rest of the week's conversation. Jerod Mayo was able to achieve that by labeling his team soft. The fallout continues. Here's Mayo this week speaking about how he's moving on from softness.
Like I always tell you guys, I always take this opportunity to speak with you guys and really with the understanding that I'm talking to the players, right? I'm talking to the players. Obviously, there are things where I'm talking to the fans as well, but the message for those guys is it's all about the Jets and we're moving forward. Obviously there's a lot of noise out there, and I said, we are what our record is, and we have to get better, and that ultimately is my responsibility. And look, I take all the blame. It's fine.
Meanwhile, I thought Hunter Henry was outstanding, talking about just the insult of being called soft and how to deal with that.
Yeah, I think it's got to challenge you. This is a physical game, and you never want that to be your identity at all. So I think that's a big challenge for all of us. I think I've looked at myself in the mirror, and I think everybody else will look at themselves. That's a big challenge, and you never want to be identified that way.
Phil, the easiest way to move on from all this is simply to win and try to allow less than 130 yards on the ground.
That would be a huge improvement. They've been averaging 185 allowed on the ground the last 3 weeks. And you're right. The only way this gets better is if they play better. But I am wondering how the team responds to these comments, because they are still lingering. Guys in the locker room know what you're talking about when you say, hey, when you're called soft, how do you react? And what's been interesting to me is talking to a number of players, and they've been given a lot of opportunities by me, on the record and off, to say they resent the comments and that they're pissed at their head coach and that there's nothing worse you can be called as a player. And I haven't heard that. What I've heard are players who are almost embracing of that message and saying,
I want to be soft.
No, not that they want to be, but that, hey, that lights a fire under my ass. And that, hey, I don't take that personally, but I understand what the coach is trying to get out of us. And so we're going to try to show that as they go out to their first padded practice on Wednesday and prepare for the Jets. So I'm not saying that there isn't anybody in the locker room, because I won't pretend to have polled every single player in there, that dislikes what Jerod Mayo said at the podium immediately after the game. But I think for the most part, they would all hear those comments, understand why Mayo said them, poor run defense, poor running game, poor special teams, and say, yeah, he was right. The same way you and I look at those comments and say, is he wrong? He's not wrong. I think I think the players had the same reaction, and I think we are almost like trying to white knight it for Patriots players. I don't think Patriots players need the people in the media to say, "Oh my God, how could he do that to them? It's so mean." It's essentially what people have been saying over the course of the last week. I don't get the sense from talking to players that that's how they feel. I think they say, "Listen, we gotta prove anybody wrong. If anybody feels that way about us, Jerod Mayo included." And so, if it's a motivating thing for them, great, but we won't know whether it was or not until they play against the Jets and look any better than they did against the Jaguars.
Well, we all understand that the whitest knight of them all, riding across the desert on his fine Arab Charger, it's the Rolling Stones, emotional rescue, was Bill Belichick. And here's Bill earlier this week speaking about the great offense he took and the hurt and damage caused by Jerod Mayo's words. And then you'll hear Devin McCourty from Pro Football Talk Live with Mike Florio reacting to Bill's reaction and just hoping that we can all get along.
I hate to see the way that, when Mayo speaks, it kind of, it gets turned into, well, he's kind of taking a shot at Bill. Bill speaks, he's kind of taking a shot at Mayo. These two, we used to call Jerod Belichick. We used to say he was like Bill's, long lost son because of how he was and how, similar he was to Bill as a player. So I hate to see the way this has all unfolded, that they're not kind of close, and Jerod can't call up Bill as a former, colleague, as a coach, and then, as your former head coach. I hate that part of this. So hopefully they work this out and we stop seeing these kind of subtle shots back and forth in the media.
Phil, Glenn Ordway had a tremendous observation relative to the ongoing pissing contest and why Bill might have unloaded the chamber this week. And Glenn, and again, you might hear it, said, why did Robert have to go on Charlemagne the God and talk about firing Bill? That just opened up a can of worms. Now Bill's going to want to fire back. Kind of a good point by Glenn. And when you think about it, the timeline fit perfectly. This is the first occasion on which Bill got that stumpy chin out there and started really going after the message. And he had more reason to do that now than at any other time, even though he did gild the lily a little bit by pretending that Christian Barmore, Jabril Peppers, and Juwan Bentley were all in the field still, but whatever. But you listen to
unbelievable. Yeah.
But it's a really good observation by Glenn, because this is going to continue, and it does come back to Kraft kind of throwing the first rock here.
Well, and, what better way for Bill Belichick to get back at Robert Kraft, if that is the case,
exactly,
than by criticizing the guy that Robert Kraft chose to succeed Bill. And he's criticizing the message, he's criticizing the ability to coach run defense, and basically the same players. We were number one in the league in run defense last year. So they're all the way down in the 20s somewhere now. I'm not sure how that happened. Must have been that coach you got there, Robert. So I think it's a fair point by Glenn. And I do wonder, too, just how closely he is paying attention to it. On WEEI, Jerod was asked recently, because he made some sort of comment about the roster wasn't in great shape when they all took over. And I think it was Chris Curtis who asked the follow-up saying, well, why was the roster in bad shape when you took over? And Jerod said, you tell me. I'm not getting into that. So he doesn't mention Bill by name, but there is a back and forth that shines a light on the work or lack thereof that Belichick did with the roster last few years.
The ironic thing is this parallels Mayo calling the team soft. Yeah, they were soft, but you can't say that. And in Mayo's case, you can't necessarily say, I'm not talking about why the roster stinks, because you're inferring the reason it stinks was your predecessor. There are myriad ways to avoid saying your team is soft. We're not playing up to the physicality that I presume we have. There's a million ways to deflect the question about the roster vis-a-vis Bill. A lot of decisions made over the years with, for the good of the football team that worked out great, and some have not. And we're in a position now where we're moving forward. Boom, zing, zang, gone, done. Because to me, and I remember thinking this when Jerod decided and was actually advised to use his orange juice at the owners' meetings as a prop to joke about Bill. Take a sip of it, and he ultimately spilled it, which Andrew Callahan can't drop. But there should be no invocation of Bill Belichick by Jerod Mayo, because it only creates chaos. But I think what also needs to be circled back upon is why the Patriots are here, and Robert Kraft's constant need for not affirmation, but justification. He wants to continue to explain, I moved on from this great coach, from this legend, because I had no other choice. And I think people forget just how bad it was and just how many chances Bill Belichick was given. We heard Mike Lombardi earlier this week saying, oh, why didn't Bill get a chance to clean up his mess? Well, in 2020, it was a mess. And the Kraft said, we need you to be more collaborative and get your ass to the playoffs. And they did. In 2022, it was, we're going to win a playoff game. They didn't win a playoff game. It was dysfunctional, all that stuff. 2023, we have to make the playoffs. And Kraft even backed off of that a little bit at the beginning of the season. Tough schedule out there. I don't know. Maybe the playoffs is a long shot. They weren't even close. So what they were left with as the season unfolded after Bill Belichick had signed a 2-year deal, and because Jerod Mayo had wanted to go elsewhere because he felt he was blocked and he felt he'd have a different opportunity someplace else, after the 2022 season, the Krafts didn't want Mayo to go if Belichick was only around for 2 more years. Let Belichick break the record. What's the worst that can happen? It's not like he's going to win 4 games. So we'll do Mayo for 2 years. And after he leaves, then we'll do Bill for 2 years. After he leaves, we'll make our decision with Jerod. But when the season goes belly up and you have to begin making plans and you realize, well, we've kind of promised a job to this guy, and you put him into that position, the point I'm about to make is Jerod Mayo is not going to get fired after this year, is my belief, unless something chaotic happens. Because Jerod Mayo is kind of taking the bullets right now for a decision that was precipitated by Bill's inability to get this team to play at any kind of a decent level.
I believe the same, and just think about what kind of hit that would be to Robert Kraft after firing Bill Belichick 1 year later to fire the successor that you had planned on having for Bill Belichick for multiple years. What kind of reflection is that on you and your decision making? And do you come off as a rash individual, just another rash NFL owner, if you end up firing a guy that you had planned for a long time to be in the position that he's in right now, knowing full well that it wasn't going to go well this year? Expectations were low, about as low as they could get. And they might have been lowered even more, Tom, once the season began. And you lose guys like Barmore and David Andrews midseason and Juwan Bentley midseason. And, those things happen. And I don't think you can be under any illusion that it's suddenly going to look amazing. Can you hope and feel and wish that it looks better than it does at times? Better than it does right now? Of course. And I think it would be totally within Robert Kraft's right to feel as though, can we not allow almost 200 yards on the ground a week? Is there something we can do there with Jerod? Is there can you have the players not on social media on the time? Is there anything we can do to make sure guys aren't having run-ins with different law enforcement entities on a bi-weekly basis?
And could you individually do me a favor and just kind of work on your messaging a bit?
Sure.
Have exactly what you want to say, anticipate the questions, have what you want to say, have some meat to them, and then move on to the next one.
Totally fair. But I don't think he's moving off of Jerod Mayo anytime soon. I think they knew this was going to take time, and my understanding is they still intend to give him that time.
It's funny, it's very hard to be. This is a position that I think it was David Culley found himself in with Houston. Now, David Culley wasn't succeeding any legendary coach, but David Culley took all the hits for the Houston Texans. You can't even say that Patricia took the hits in Detroit after Jim Caldwell because the team got worse. How do you do that, Matt? But when you think about that, Mayo is in an unbelievably difficult position as a first-year head coach. And then he has the treble damages of the fact that they've got the injuries, treble damages of the fact that they didn't get their first choice as offensive coordinator, treble damages of the fact that Bill's left, Steve's left, and Jerod is off the defense as well. So you've lost a whole lot of gray matter on the defensive side of the ball. This is the rebuildiest of rebuild years I've ever seen in my life.
It's what makes it such a huge challenge. Now, how should he be spreading himself out, Jerod Mayo, as head coach? Should he be more involved on the defensive side just to try to make sure you get things plugged up there? Because the offense, Tom, quite frankly, last couple of weeks hasn't been the biggest issue.
Nope.
So whatever time you're spending there, whatever brain power is being spent there, do you allocate more of it to the defensive side? I look at the roster, Tom, and I wonder how much better it can get. I asked Jerod Mayo today about major philosophical changes on the defensive side. If you're a two-gapping defense, do you need to become a one-gapping defense? Like very foundational stuff. Do you just throw out everything you did in training camp? Because you don't even have the players to execute what you're being asked to execute right now. Because I kind of think that's where they are. I look at who's out there at defensive tackle at times. Jaquelin Roy, give him all the credit in the world, number 94, and he's made some good plays over the course of the last couple of weeks. I've seen run blitzes attempted. I've seen bodies in the box. Nobody played on a rate basis. Nobody played more snaps with 8 or more defenders in the box than the Patriots did this past week.
Oh, thank you, because I was wondering if that had happened.
The Jaguars.
Thanks for the research, Phil.
Running. They did try some things. They threw numbers at the problem. They changed alignments. They blitzed occasionally, as Ted Johnson pointed out on the breakdown. And they still had no answers. And I don't think they're going to find any answers this season just because of the personnel that they have on the field right now.
And the hard thing is how quickly you can find those answers when you're a team that's this bad. For instance, when you're the Dolphins, how did you reboot? Well, you had a 6th overall pick, then you got Jalen Waddle, then you traded for Tyreek Hill, and you found yourself, who was their left tackle?
Teron Armstead?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's
that
hard.
Miami? Sorry, I kind of
Miami.
Miami.
It's just hard to be attractive.
Yeah.
You got to make yourselves attractive. Right now, not attractive.
Other than the quarterback.
Oh, he's
attractive.
Very handsome. How do you feel the Patriots and Jets match up this weekend, Phil? They seem the Jets are in, as the San Francisco 49ers were, as the Jaguars were. They're in, holy we got to beat the hell out of this team or we're really screwed.
They're everybody's get-right game right now. Not a good matchup. They've got 2 really good running backs, the Jets do. Breece Hall is fantastic. He's just, especially when he's out in the open field, he is so dynamic, so electric. For a team that's had tackling issues, I think he's going to be a real problem for them. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is very good. He didn't look anywhere near the guy that we saw on Thursday Night Football when he could do whatever he wanted, it felt like, in that game. But their running game should be enough to beat up this Patriots defense again, I think, unfortunately for them.
Well, hopefully the weather holds. That's all I could say. Hopefully the weather holds.